welcome to this 15-minute yoga for hip pain practice. We're going to start off in a seated position today. You're going to have a little seat with your bum on your heels, and we're going to figure out how our pelvis should sit over our hips. So it's very common with hip pain for people to kind of brace or tuck their pelvis in and flatten their lower back, and that kind of limits your hips being able to move well. So you're going to place your hands on your pelvis, one either side, and think about your pelvis rocking forward on your heels. And that creates a curve in your lower back or a dip in your lower back. So go back again to that flat back. So tuck your bum in, flatten your lower back, use your hands to feel this. And then what I want everyone to do is to rock their pelvis forward and feel a dip in your lower back. And then we're going to start to move our hips from here. So you're going to have your legs hip distance apart, so there can be a little bit of a space maybe between your thighs. Pop your hands on that hip crease. You're going to tighten your bum muscles. See if you can feel them tighten through your heels. And then press the hips up and forward. So the hips are straightening, and then hands on the hips, almost like you kind of karate chop them, fold back at the hips. So tighten your bum. Feel the hips drive up and forward, and then fold. Imagine the ball of the hip moving back into the socket as you go back down. And we're going to go for 6 more of these. So bum on, drive the hips forward, relax the bum, and think about your hips moving back towards your heels. Tighten the butt muscles, drive the hips forward, relax the butt muscles, and let your hips fold back towards your heels. And going for 3 more. So it's just isolating hip movement, keeping your back and pelvis in a position that allows your hips to move a little bit more freely. It should feel quite easy, and you might feel a little bit of tension through your butt muscles. And then from here, we're going to come into a nice little bit of mobility stretch in what we call a 90-90 hip position. So your left shin is going to be parallel to the top of your mat, and your right shin is going to line up with the right long edge of the mat. And then from here, we're just going to fold forward from the hips a little. Now, if you're really tight, you can have a few pillows in front of you here, or you can just stay sitting upright if that's enough for now. Otherwise, bring your fingertips to the ground first, then plant your hands on the ground if that's okay. And if that feels okay for you, you can walk your hands forward a little bit, and we're looking to find a stretch in the back of the left hip or the left butt cheek. Walking your hands forward. If it's comfortable for you, lower your elbows to the ground. And if it's comfortable for you, I don't think it is for me, you can lower your head all the way to the ground. Or I will stack my fists and I'll rest my forehead on my fist. And you're here for 5 nice deep breaths, breathing in through the nose, down deep into the lower lungs, into the belly. And then breathing out through the nose or mouth. Every time you breathe out, if you feel tension somewhere, focus on that area softening. Or focus on that area resting into the ground. Last 2 breath cycles here. And then bring your hands back. Walk yourself back up, and we'll swap to the other side. So bring your right foot to the front, left leg back. So your right shin is parallel to the top edge of the mat, and your left shin is parallel to the left long edge of the mat. And then from here, maybe this is enough for you today. You're going to hold here. You can put your hands on your belly and focus on your breathing. It will help release your hip flexor muscles so that attach up to the same area as your breathing muscle. Or you can bring your hands onto the ground and walk them forward as far as is comfortable for you. And you're here for 5 breath cycles, breathing in through the nose, down deep into the belly, lower lungs. Breathing out through the nose or mouth. You should feel a stretch sensation in the back of your right hip, your right butt cheek area. Every time you breathe out, Focus on those tight muscles softening, lengthening, and letting go. And 2 more breath cycles here. And then walking our hands back up, we're all going to move into all fours. So hands underneath your shoulders, knees underneath your hips. And we're going to do one last exercise before we go into a little flow or a sequence of movements. Here we're going to make sure again that we have our pelvis and lower back in a nice position to allow our hips the best chance of moving well. So take your left hand or whichever hand is comfortable to put on your lower back. And think about sticking your tailbone up so you feel a little bit of a dip in your lower back. I don't want your lower back completely flat or rounded up towards the ceiling. So a little bit of a dip in the lower back. And then you're going to straighten your left leg out, nice and long. If you want to make sure your pelvis stays in a good position and you're able to, take your right hand and put it on the front of your right hip. You need to keep that right hip pressed back. If it falls forward, your muscles won't work very well around your hip. So press the right hip back and then tighten your left butt cheek and lift the leg, keeping it straight. And you're just going to lift and lower that left leg 8 times. So we have 6 more to go. Think about reaching out through the left heel, pushing the back of that left heel up towards the ceiling, all the movements coming from your left hip joint. You're trying to keep your pelvis and your lower back quite still. And the stiller you keep them, the more the muscles will work around the back of your hip, which is what we want. And then lower that leg down, give your hips a wiggle from side to side, and let's try it on the other side. So again, check in with the lower back. Is there a nice little dip in it? Tailbone up. You should be able to wiggle your hips. Straighten the right leg out nice and long. Think about reaching out through the heel, keep the knee straight. And then we want to check that our pelvis stays steady. So as we lift the leg, we don't want our pelvis to kind of twist and turn. We just feel our back muscles more. So place your left hand on the front of your left hip and think about the left hip being pulled back towards the end of your mat. And then tighten the right butt cheek, lift the leg, lower the leg. And as we lift and lower the leg, all the movement should be coming from that right hip, and we're trying to keep our back and our pelvis as still as we can. If it's too hard, do just have both hands down. It gives you more support. And last 4. You should feel a little bit of work in the right glute, hopefully, if it's turning on. And then relax it down. Sit back into a child's pose for a moment. Slide the hands forward and rock your head from left to right. Take 3 breaths here. And then come back up onto all 4s. You're going to inhale into your cat-cow movement. Exhale as you round your spine up towards the ceiling. And doing 2 more in sync with your breath. So just loosening up through the pelvis, hips, and spine with this simple movement. Then tuck your toes underneath. Press your hips up and back. Keep a nice bend in the knees and pedal out the heels. So stretching into the calves and the hamstrings. And then we're going to put all of our weight into the left foot. And you're going to pick up the right foot and bring it forward. Lower your left knee down to the ground. You can flatten the foot out. And then bring your hands to your hips. Check in that the hips are looking straight ahead. Reach your tailbone down towards the ground or tuck your bum in. And then reach your left hand up past your left ear towards the ceiling and over to the right slightly. And you should feel a nice stretch through the front of your left hip. To add to it, you can pull the left thumb back a little bit. And you're just here for 2 or 3 breaths, again trying to breathe down deep into the lower rib cage. Then bring both hands to your hips, tuck the toes of the back foot underneath, and come up into a high lunge position. This is the last bit in our little flow. So place your hands on your hips, so that's quite low. So not up around your waist. Bring them down to your hips. and get your trunk right over your hips so you're not falling forward. And then from here, can you think about folding at your hip joints, keeping that tailbone sticking up a little bit, and fold from your hip joints until your trunk, your torso, is almost parallel to the floor. Think about that right hip being pulled back into the hip socket, really push down through your right foot, especially your heel, and then see if you can straighten up through the hips until your trunk or your shoulders are right over your hips again. And let's see if we can do 2 more like that. Fold forward at the hips, use your hands to feel where the hips are. Keep that tailbone sticking up. So you have that curve in your lower back, so all the movements from your hips, not your lower back. Push your heel into the ground as you straighten back up from the hips. You should really start to feel your right bum muscle working now. And last one, fold forward. Think about that right hip being pulled back into the hip socket. Push into your right outer heel and straighten back up. Lower the back knee down to the floor, come back to all fours and into 3 little cat-cows in sync with your breath. Then tuck the toes underneath and lift your hips up and back and pedal out the heels. You're in your last downward dog. We're going to put all the weight in the right leg this time. You're going to pick the left leg up and move it forward to the front of the mat. Now that might take you 1 step, or if you're new to yoga, it might take you about 6. You can just walk it forward and come into that low lunge position, whatever way is comfortable for you today. Come up into, so you have your shoulders over your hips. This time you're going to reach your tailbone down to the floor. You can pop your hand at the back of your pelvis to feel that tuck. Reach your right arm up past your right ear and then over to the left. You should feel a stretch through the front of your right hip. And you're here for 2 or 3 breaths. Then bring the hands to the ground, tuck the toes underneath, so you have a nice stable base in both feet. And then you're going to come up into your high lunge position, placing your hands on your hips. Have a look down at the front leg, make sure your knee is over your heel like a pillar, and that you've got a nice bit of weight in your outer heel. Bring the hands to the hips, and before we start, let's get our shoulders right over our hips. Fold forward at the hips. Think about that left hip getting pulled back behind you. Your tailbone stays sticking up, so we keep the little curve in your lower back. And then push your left heel into the ground until you feel that left bum muscle working, and then straighten up. All the straightening up comes from your hips. And then fold forward again, and we're going to try 3 more of these. You're going to keep that tailbone sticking up slightly to keep that natural curve in your lower back. And then push into the heel to help turn on the muscles at the back of your hip to take you back up. And 2 more to go. Fold forward until your trunk is almost parallel to the floor. You should feel a bit of work in your hamstring, back of the leg, and your bum. Straighten up. And last one. Fold forward from the hips. Straighten all the way up so your shoulders come over your hips. And then lower the back knee to the floor. Last little round of cat-cow. Inhale to lift the head and the tail, and exhale to round. So getting your spine, pelvis, and hips to all kind of move together. Our last kind of position or pose in this practice is going to release out the muscle and the nerve at the front of our hip, which can often be forgotten a little bit. So it's called our femoral nerve, or you might be tightening your quads. It will do either. So we're going to pop ourselves in a position with our elbows underneath our shoulders. Our chest and head is lifted, so we're looking straight ahead or slightly up if you want. And we're going to start with the left leg. You're just going to bring your left heel to your bum. And as you lower the leg, you can look down to the mat. And as you lift your heel towards your bum, you can look up towards the ceiling. So this is just a little nerve mobility exercise. So when we lift our head, we give our nervous system a little bit of slack or a little bit of ability to move more. And when we round our head, it puts a bit of tension on it. Going for 2 more. Lifting the head, bringing the heel to the bum, And then allowing the head to drop, letting the foot drop. Oh, just one more because it feels kind of good. And then we're going to hold in for a quad stretch. So you're going to slide the right hand out. That's still going to kind of support you. Keep the forearm on the ground. Keep your head lifted slightly. And just bring your left heel to your bum as far as you can bring it. Make sure your knee is still under your hip and it doesn't drift out to the side. And if you can't, it's fine. Take a hold of your left foot and just help pull it a little bit closer to your butt. And you're here for 3 breaths, and you should feel a stretch into the front of the thigh, so your quad muscle. And then release the foot. Bring your elbows back underneath your shoulders, and let's do it on the other side. So lift your head and bring the right heel to your right bum cheek, and then lower the right foot, lower the head. And we're going to go for 6 more. Heel to the butt cheek, lift the head, and bring it back down. If you have any discomfort in your neck, just lift the head so you're looking straight ahead of you. You don't have to look up towards the ceiling. And last one. Bring the heel to the bum, slide the left hand out a little so you can lower your chest a little bit. And then bring that right hand behind you, palm faces in towards the foot. And if you can take a hold of the foot, gently bring the heel closer to the right bum cheek. And you're here for 3 or 4 breaths. And just notice if it's tight or tense. Some people might be really tight at the back of their leg in their hamstrings, and other people might be very tight at the front. So everyone's a little bit different. And then relax the feet, prop yourself up on your forearms, and you're all done with your hip yoga practice.